Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much. It's really exciting times because we went to firmware 0.1.8.8 and what did we get? Got a 3-band graphic equalizer. Well, is it a graphic equalizer? We've only got 3 bands. That ain't a good start, to be quite honest with you. But the thing is, are they real sliders? There's no indication of actual decibel gain. That's my first hint. There may be issues ahead. And we got all of 1, 2 up, and we got 1, 2 down. We don't have a lot of headroom visibly in the brand new JBL, because we already had it for the Flip 6, and I have to say there was a real headroom in the Flip 6. Of course, it was designed to go with the graphic equalizer, so they could already bake in some headroom. This is tuned before the EQ came along, which makes me wonder, you know, they're already limiting bass at 80%, of course. We talk about, oh, they're reducing the basses, you got 90%, 95%. No, they're not. They're limiting bass. I hear this all the time. And then they reduce bass. No, relatively, bass is reduced as you got the volume. But on all these speakers, when you hit a volume, a bass limit, the bass is limiting. It's not reducing. It's just not going up as fast as the mids and the highs. So what we're going to have to do is a quick sine wave sweep. We're going to have to look at the frequency response. I'm going to see, is there a real headroom? I would be major surprised if there was a real headroom now with this graphic equalizer.
66% volume, default EQ versus +2 on the bass. And as you see, oh nice, we do get more bass compared to default EQ. But hang on a second, it's not just bass. It's also reducing the mids and the highs. So this is not a straight equalizer. It will of course sound more bass heavy, even if you didn't touch the bass and you reduce the mids and the highs. The overall slant of the frequency response has changed, making it sound a little more bass heavy. We see the same sort of thing with the mids. We do get a mids push, so we're talking 450 Hz to 2.5 kilohertz approximately. We do get gain in the mids, but we're losing bass, we're losing upper bass, and we're losing in the highs. So you can see there's a lot of relative shifting going on. It's not just a straight equalizer. And no surprise when we go to the treble, yes, 5.5 kilohertz and above, there's a gain in the treble, but we're losing mids, upper bass, lower bass. So what happens? We push everything. We max all the sliders out, the 3 sliders that we've got. We've now got real gain in each of those areas, and we can see where they are. The bass 250 Hz and down, the mids 400 Hz to about 2.5 kilohertz, and the treble 4.5 kilohertz and above. And in between those sections, there is a little bit of loss there. So you can certainly alter the signature sound, but it's not a straight equalizer. If we're actually looking at what the headroom is, now we're reducing everything, -2, -2, -2. So that was +2, -2. And as you can see, there's more difference going -2 than there is +2. A straight equalizer should be the same, shouldn't it? So everything's reduced, -2, but not quite everything, +2, and the amount of reduction is greater, -2. So ultimately, what is the headroom? And here we see there really isn't true headroom, because if you push everything, +2 bass, +2 mids, +2 treble, we're at maximum volume already. It's really just a small section of the mids that's getting pushed. We're actually getting bass reduction, lower mids, upper bass reduced, a small amount of gain in the treble, but it's mostly mids, and you are losing bass. So ultimately, to play around with the signature tune, but over the default tuning that we've already had, there's no real headroom. The speaker was already maxed out.
Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So you can mess around with a 3-band graphic equalizer if you go to what I'm calling +2, because there's no indication of what that second slider is supposed to equate to. But if you go there, what's happening? Yes, you are getting more bass at particular volumes, but you're also getting a reduction in the mids and the highs. So that's cheating a bit. That's giving you what may sound like a more bass heavy sound, but you're not getting more bass. There isn't apparently real headroom. We already knew it limited at 80%. Now looks like if you go +2, it just means you're limiting at 70%. So what is really going on? This is going to be So you can mess, look, you can mess with the sound signature. If you really want a 3-band graphic equalizer, loosely termed graphic equalizer, because it's not a pure graphic equalizer, and you don't want to go into software graphic equalizers, they're going to do a better job, aren't they? But I don't personally like using software third-party graphic equalizers. When it's embedded in the firmware, it's designed to go with the speaker. I prefer doing that. I only do that. And that, when it comes to comparisons in my videos, I will only use where it can be embedded in the firmware, because otherwise there's an infinite number of ways I could be messing around with the EQ, and someone will say I like that, and someone else will say there's no point, because somebody will not be happy. So the question is, let's have a closer look now at what is happening. If you do choose to start hitting the bass +2, how far can you go with that? Because there isn't real headroom, so you're going to hit limits.
So we know in default tuning, we do hit a limit on the bass. It's around 80%. You get a little bit more deep bass, but basically that bass is limiting in terms of how the rest of the frequency response is going up at 80%. And we've already seen that when you start maxing out the bass in the EQ, it's playing fast and loose with the rest of the frequency response. So if you were looking to get maximum bass out of the speaker, you're going to notice that actually you're hitting that limit now at 70%. There's no free lunch here. If you leave it in default, you hit the limit at 80%. If you try and play with the EQ +2, you're going to hit bass limit 70%. So a lot of what you can do within the EQ in the app is going to depend on what volume you're at, because once you've hit that limit, 70% on bass, it's making it sound more bass heavy from there on by reducing the mids and the highs. It's going to cost you in volume. So before, when you hit your 80% limit, bass wasn't going up, but your mids and highs were going up, and that's where your volume's coming from. But because you're using the app now, it's reducing bass, it's increasing highs at the expense of the mids and the highs, you're going to end up with less volume. So if you are always listening to your speaker, your Xtreme 3, 70, 80% and above, what the cost of getting a more bass heavy sound is simply you're losing volume. So adjusting volume in default EQ can kind of get you the same thing, but with more volume. We go through some of those volume steps. It's before we hit the limit. 60%, you can see, yes, +2, we've got more bass, but at the cost of highs, mids. 70%, we're hitting the bass limit now when you're in the EQ, but of course you'll still hear a more bass heavy sound. 80%, you see what's happening. We had more bass by hitting +2 in the EQ, but now we don't. There's no more bass. And you're being kidded to think there's more bass because you've lost volume. You've now lost overall volume because it's reducing the mids and the highs. The bass is the same. Look at that, 100 Hertz and below, +2 in the EQ does not give you more bass. There is no headroom on the Xtreme 3. 90%, the same thing, 100%. All hitting +2 in the EQ does is reduce overall volume if you're looking for a more bass heavy sound.
So okay, they can claim they've got an equalizer now, and all the JBL fanboys will say, not only have we got the world's greatest logo and racetrack drivers, not in this one, but in a lot of their speakers, they will have their oval-shaped not graphic equalizer, they have their oval-shaped drivers, very, very fast because it's a racetrack. Look, a lot of marketing goes into JBL, but also some serious effort. JBL Harman are one of the leaders in research in audio. But in terms of where we are with the speaker, the graphic equalizer, look, you can alter the sound signature, but it's going to make more difference at lower volumes. Clearly, there's an issue. Well, there's an issue when we go +2. Now, where am I personally with my equalizer settings? I will go over that. Personally, I'm settling at +1, 0, 0. I'll explain that.
So having messed with the EQ in the app, 70, 80, 90, 100% volumes here I'm showing you. Finding the best compromise for me personally for most of the time to hear what sounds like a fuller sound, just to go +1 on the bass. So you're not compromising overall volume too much once you start going to higher volumes. But we do have that kind of nasty peak, 12, 13 kilohertz, and it is kind of dominating the bass still. So in the real world, you may want to go -1 on the highs, but it only really works at higher volumes, and at lower volumes you probably want a bit more of a V-shaped. You don't want -1, you probably want +1 on the treble. So I find if you're looking for one default EQ, for me personally, that works overall, I'm going for now with simply +1 on the bass. For me, is the best all-round compromise.
If you go +1, it looks like you can get some real bass gain. Up to that limit around 70%. You can get a little bit more bass after that, but to all intents and purposes, 70% becomes the limit where it starts limiting bass. And if you use default, it will limit from 80% onwards. If you go +1, you're not getting the relative juggling. Sony do that as well. So you go +1, but after that, if you go +1.5, +2, it's going to reduce the mids and the highs. It's going to play. You could push them all up to +2, and you'll get some real headroom. But this is the problem. It's running on an algorithm. It's not a graphic equalizer. It's playing. There is no headroom, and it's playing fast and loose. You can change the sound signature, but if you're someone already playing near maximum volume, there's not much you can do other than it's going to reduce the mids and highs to give you an appearance of more in the bass. Unless you actually want more mids and highs and a more screechy sound at maximum volume, it's not pleasant. Yes, you can certainly do that. So, +1 is real gain, 70% and below. It doesn't juggle mids and the highs. If you go over +1, you're just losing out in the mids and highs. So I'm going at +1. It does, at moderate volumes, make it sound fuller, certainly to my ears. At louder volumes, I would say, yes, you probably want to go minus. I personally would go -1 to start taming the highs on this, in the highs. But at lower volumes, I would actually want to go +1. So I'm sticking, at my rule, analyst's rule in his videos is one equalizer setting for all volume. Otherwise, I'm going to be spending my life on one speaker trying to get every combination for every volume step. But don't forget, these speakers change at every volume step. So my all-round, but not optimized for any particular volume, is +100. It's not a big deal, is it? But hey-ho, you can do that. Let's have a listen to real-world tracks. As I already said previously, sine waves is one thing with a single tone, but what these speakers do with their real-time digital signal processing with complex tracks, and especially bass-heavy tracks, is a whole different ballgame. 60%.
So let me put the work in, here for the long run, not just flirting. I'm in love with the game so much it hurts me, cause I'm the main show, cue the curtains. Ain't no one could be with me, ain't no one could be with me. And I see the gas and get it through your brain, ain't no one could be with me. No one else can do it like I do. No one else can do it like I do. So let me just move your way. So let me just save the day. So let me just work my magic. Let me just come and play. So let me just move your way. So let me just save the day. So let me just work my magic. Let me just come and play. Let me put the work in. Baby, let me see what I can do. Let me put the work in. If anyone can, I'ma. So let me put the work in. Here for the long run, not just flirting. I'm in love with the game so much it hurts me, cause I'm the main show, cue the curtains. Ain't no one could be with me, ain't no one could be with me. And I see the gas and get it through your brain. Ain't no one could be with me. No one else can do it like I do. No one else can do it like I do. So let me just move your way. So let me just save the day. So let me just work my magic. Let me just come and play. So let me just move your way. So let me just save the day. So let me just work my magic. Let me just come and play. Let me put the work in. Baby, let me see what I can do. Let me put the work in. If anyone can, I'ma.
So in the real world, the difference in actual complex tracks, is less than simple frequency response measurements may suggest. Default mode +1 bass, mids and highs basically the same, fraction less in the mids and highs when you go +1 bass, but almost nothing, with about a half a decibel gain overall in the bass. It's subtle, but there's enough there that you can hear it as a bit of a fuller sound. But when you hit +2 in the bass, now there's a proper difference in the mids and the highs. There is a significant cut in the mids and the highs, while the bass is actually about the same as with +1. So really, the headroom here is +1, and once you go above +1, it's giving you a so-called bass heavier sound by simply cutting mids and highs.
So it's interesting, you can see exactly what's happening. The gain, if you go +1 in the bass, that gain that you achieve, which is real gain at 60%, is the exact same gain at +2. The difference is when you go to +2, after +1, and then you go higher, it's just reducing the mids and the highs. So it's playing fast and loose. There is not real headroom on the JBL extremely priced 3. And it's reducing the mids and highs a lot more than the gain in the bass at +1. You may like that because you may not like the highs, which are a little bit screechy, actually quite unbalanced on the Extreme 3. But personally, of all the Extremes, I prefer the balance of the JBL Xtreme 3 the most. It's the most listenable to me. It can be quite enjoyable bass-heavy sound, but it would never, ever, ever be my go-to speaker or the one speaker I was allowed to own. So we're talking about headroom, 100% volume.
I just see your city, all lay up aggressively. I've been working hard these days, homie, how you stressing, yeah. Oh, homie, how you stressing, you can check my stats, yeah, you can check my resume. I see y'all sitting down, all lay up aggressively. I've been working hard these days, homie, how you stressing, yeah. Oh, homie, how you stressing, you can check my stats, yeah, you can check my resume. Cause I come like a killer, I build it up, I'm getting iller. I'm the first, I'm just getting realer. Yeah, that's what I do when I build my pillars. Build my castle, build my house. Yeah, I really built this town, so I gotta strike them. Yeah, I gotta rap and bring them down. Yeah, I really came to bring this. Man, I really came to rap these balls, man, I just gotta win this. Man, I'm up in this ring right now, I'ma take them out, you can be the witness. I get this, up on this level, I've been elevating, hey. Y'all been wrong, being lazy, elevating, going up. Well, I've been walking up the stairs. This life is really crazy and it sure as hell ain't fair. But that is all okay, I'ma tell them I don't care. I just gotta keep them shuffling, I just gotta be the man that's really gonna do it, that is really gonna make it. Man, I feel this gravitation in my body, man, I do it for my people now, yeah, for my nation, for my soul, and for my legacy. Cause I'm on my path and I be coming for my destiny.
So now we find out the ultimate headroom in real-world tracks. Default mode, +1 in the bass. As before, about a half a decibel true gain in the bass when you go to +1. And that's mostly in the upper bass. And there's a tiny, tiny cut in the mids and the highs, so small that you probably won't notice. It does mean by an absolute fraction, maximum volume is achieved with default mode because it has more mids and highs. And when you go to +2 bass, there's an absolute fraction more bass than you would get with +1, but to all intents and purposes, it is +1, but with a significant cut in the mids and highs, as we saw at lower volumes. So we're talking a half to 1 decibel gain in terms of the mids and the highs, with a tiny bit more in the bass, but the same bass as you'd get with +1 over default mode. And it does mean when you go +2 bass, it's now the quietest mode. But the difference is subtle between them all, but just enough that you will hear it. In the real world, there is no real headroom on the Xtreme 3. Once you start using EQ to push bass, you will hit bass limiting at 70% volume.
So it's the same. So it's the same old story. Look, there is a tiny bit of real gain, even at maximum volume, at +1. But it's tiny. It's tiny, and whether you can hear that or not, that's up for debate. Technically, the loudest will be default because it will have the most mids and the most highs. Once you start going for more bass, it's going to start reducing, even fractionally, the mids and the highs. +1 is a cutoff point, as far as I can see, for not getting significant reduction in the mids and the highs. And after +1, that's all it's doing, is reducing the mids and the highs. The actual bass on +2 and +1 are identical. So there you go. It's up to you. Look, it does get screechy when you go past 80%, especially at maximum volume. It is quite piercing because of that around 13 kilohertz peak. And you may find dropping the mids and highs is fine, but then you only had to not play it that loud in the first place on default. So yes, you can mess around with the sound signature, but come on. You cannot, JBL, you cannot tell me that's a graphic equalizer. It's not. Look at the latitude we've got. Latitude, long? Yeah, I think that's right. We've got 2 sliders. Whatever they're supposed to signify, I don't know. Not even going to pretend that they're decibel sliders. If you drop them, you're going to drop the sound a lot more than if you try to increase them. And once you go over the middle slider, it's just going to play fast and loose with the rest of the frequency response. So it's an algorithm graph. It's an algorithm equalizer, just like Sony do. What it's not is, what's it not, Alan? It's not a graphic equalizer, is it? No. So look, it's better to have it than not have it, because at least you've got the option of not using it. But it's not a game changer for JBL. It probably is in the marketing, and a lot of people just go by the marketing because a lot of channels, I'm going to say it, a lot of channels will spend 95% of the time just telling you the specs, and you'll hear, and it's got a graphic equalizer. And you, woo, that's the one for me. Shh, I'm out, because that's not really telling you what's happening with the sound. I think anybody who wants to mess with the graphic equalizer on the JBL Xtreme 3 will still do what they did before. They're going to use third-party software because you don't have much flexibility with that, I'm afraid. But yeah, if you want some sort of sound molding that's going to travel with the speaker and not be device that you're playing from specific, then you're going to do that. It looks great in the marketing specs. It's going to sell well because of that. It's going to sell well alongside the massive logo that glows red when you go to the side. So that's been my JBL EQ overview. The conclusion is, because you've probably come straight to this point in the video, you've missed out 43 ads. You're leaving me as poor as I was before, and all you want to hear is, it's not a game changer. You can make a little bit of a difference, but you can't make much of a difference. But hey, look, at lower volumes, it's going to make more difference. And for me personally, I'm leaving it at +1 because it makes it sound a little bit fuller. To me, a little bit more. It's not making it more bass deep, and it's not suddenly, I'm not suddenly going from, the neighbours can't even hear it, to, oh, yeah, will you turn it out? That's not going to happen. It's just a bit fuller. We've already got a bit of a suck out in the mids. And because of the narrow nature of, well, I'm saying narrow, actually it's quite wide on these on the bands, but you cannot really push the mids, not where it's actually dipping. So to me, that was a disappointment. It's not a Soundcore multi-band graphic equalizer where it's not playing fast and loose. It's actually giving you gain in the sliders, where it's telling you, 80 hertz, 150 hertz. That's where you actually get the gain. But hey ho, you've got an option now that you didn't have before. Happy Christmas, and I wish you a Happy New Year.
We wish you a